In 1935, Tupelo, Mississippi was little more than a poor southern town struggling to make itself into a city. Its only claim to fame up to that point was that novelist William Faulkner had been born only 35 miles away. With the Great Depression raging across the nation and Jim Crow the law of the land down south, little had changed in Tupelo since it had been founded in 1870. There was no fanfare on January 8, 1935, when a baby boy was born to Vernon and Gladys Presley in a two-room shotgun shack on the outskirts of town. The boy was the second of a set of twins that had been delivered with some difficulty. The first twin was stillborn. The Presleys decided to name the child nonetheless and chose Jesse Garin Presley as the name of their first son, who would soon be buried at Priceville Cemetery. They christened their surviving son Elvis Aaron Presley in honor of his father's middle name and as a rhyming tribute to his brother. A poor boy born into the last dying breath of the Old South, there was no indication that the baby now resting in a blanket next to his mother by the light of oil lamps in their modest home would spark a cultural revolution the likes of which mankind had never seen. Elvis Presley was going to change the world, but growing up, even for a future king, is always difficult. Tupelo, Mississippi, with its dirty streets and moonshine whiskey, had served its purpose as the beginning of a story that would one day enthrall people all over the world. But the real story would always lead to a city on the Mississippi River, one whose name went all the way back to ancient Egypt as a mythical and powerful city where gods were born. One whose name is still spoken with awe: Memphis. Vernon, Gladys, and Elvis Presley arrived in Memphis, Tennessee in 1948 with their worldly possessions strapped to the top of their car. The young family hoped that by moving to a new city, they could escape the poverty that had dogged them in Tupelo. But it would be a hard climb from the underbelly of society. The Presleys would have some assistance, however. They managed to get an apartment at a public housing project called Lauderdale Courts, which, as luck would have it, was within walking distance of Vernon's job and would only cost them $35 a month in rent. The complex also served as Elvis's home, playground, and hideaway during the formative years of his later childhood. America was also undergoing a transformation during those years. World War II had left the nation with more prosperity than it had seen in a generation. People were working hard now, not just to survive, but to afford some of the new comforts life had to offer, like automated kitchens, big cars, and a new device that was making entertainment not only a part of life, but almost a necessity: the television set. For his part, young Elvis was traumatized by the move. Though he had always been somewhat separate from his classmates in Tupelo, he had at least known them all. Now he was faced with having to go to a new school where he would feel even more like an outsider. With his outlandish hair and shy demeanor, young Elvis cut quite a striking figure in early 1950s Memphis. But Memphis had always been a city that embraced its differences while managing to exploit them at the same time. It was the home of WDIA, the first all-black radio station in the nation, which featured DJs like school teacher by day Nat D. Williams and future blues legend B.B. King. It was also the birthplace of something that would change the world, although it didn't have a champion or even a name. On On March 5th, 1951, a small group of musicians, including a young piano player named Ike Turner, gathered at the Memphis recording service at 706 Union Avenue. That night, they recorded a single called Rocket 88. Though they considered it a strictly rhythm and blues record, the press and the public started calling it by a new name, rock and roll. Soon afterwards, the Memphis recording service also had a new name, Sun Records.
Elvis moved up from Tupelo, Mississippi, 1948, and enrolled in Humes High School. Coincidentally and ironically, we're in the exact same classes from the 8th grade until the 12th grade.
You know, everybody tried to dress like everybody else, but Elvis didn't. The thing I remember about him more than anything else was it could be the coldest day and he would have a suit coat on with the flap up on his collar. I always felt that maybe he couldn't afford a jacket.
I met Elvis in about 1949 when I moved in Lauderdale Courts. We lived in an apartment building. It was probably 54 apartments in the building. And sometime within the first 2 or 3 months, and I met Elvis.
Elvis, when he was young, didn't have too many friends. He was always a strange kid in high school and in his neighborhood. He was the one with long hair and the weird clothes. Everybody else wore T-shirts and crew cuts. So he didn't have too many friends.
Elvis and I first met in January ¡54. He was, of course, had already graduated from school, and I was in school, a sophomore at Southside. And I think Elvis always dressed flashy. The first time I saw him at church, he had on a dark sport coat and light pants. He was very striking and handsome, his long hair and that beautiful face. But a lot of his persona that he wanted people to see was really an effort for him to do that, because he was not that confident in himself and was basically very shy.
Elvis came there one day looking at the window. He always come by there, but I know who he was. So one day I invited him. I said, come on in, young man. Could I show you around? He said, okay. So we walked in and I showed him everything. And he said, one of these days I'm going to buy you out. I said, do me a favor, don't buy me out, just buy it from me, which he never forgot.
The class was large, 350, something like that. But everybody knew Elvis. He stood out in a way that you couldn't help from knowing him.
We did everything that you could do without money. Played an awful lot of football, dated, had our own parties. We lived close to swimming pools. We went to a lot of movies, a lot of times just sitting around talking. Elvis playing his guitar, singing.
Around this time, Elvis began to seriously ponder life after Humes High. Although he had never shied away from hard work and had always been humble and unassuming, his fondest desire was to be an entertainer. Presley spent hour after hour listening to Dewey Phillips' Red Hot and Blue on the radio and watching movies starring a new breed of actor personified by James Dean and Marlon Brando, who were known for their smoldering sex appeal and brooding, melancholy performances. He also admired Tony Curtis's hair. Although Elvis had always sung to friends and family, he hadn't performed in front of a live audience since a contest at the Tupelo Fairgrounds when he was 11 years old. That day, he had placed second with his rendition of the tearjerker Ol' Shep, winning $5 and free admission to the rides. In his senior year of high school, Elvis decided to enter the talent show competition in the hopes of furthering his private ambitions. This time, he came in first.
He won the talent contest, and that really helped his self-esteem. From that time on, you could really see the difference. Elvis, I'm sure, at that time had a whole lot to do with him deciding he really liked being in front of people and performing.
Near the end of the year, around May, we were talking about what we were going to do. And I said, well, my mom and dad want me to go to business college. And he put out a big laugh. Man, he laughed real hard. And he wasn't laughing at me, he just was laughing of the idea of going to school after getting out. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And he said, well, one of these days I want a hillbilly band.
For his part, Elvis was busy with the same things most teenage boys are concerned with: school, cars, and most of all, girls. After he graduated high school, Elvis faced an uncertain future. Although he had always been a decent student, there was no question of his proceeding to college. His parents simply couldn't afford it, and besides, he had no desire to remain in a school environment. The Presleys had been evicted from their home in Lauderdale courts because their income exceeded the allowable limit for assisted housing. But it wasn't enough to support a family of 3, so Elvis's future was clear. In order to help his family survive, he would have to go to work. Although Elvis had taken part-time jobs in the past, most significantly at the Lowe's State Theater in town, he began looking for something that could actually lead to a career. On the day of his graduation, Elvis Aaron Presley walked into the Tennessee Employment Security offices on Union Avenue and asked to be tested and placed into a job. Any job, although he did say his preference would be to drive a truck. His first assignment was a short-term job at the M.B. Parker Company, where one day his employer found him close to tears. Elvis told him that he needed an advance on his salary to make his car payment. His boss told him that was against company policy, but he would personally loan Elvis the $33. True to his word, Elvis paid him back 2 days later after receiving his paycheck. The strange part about this incident is that Elvis's car was already paid for. That same week, he showed up at the Memphis recording service to pay for and cut a record called My Happiness.
Evening shadows make me blue.
The receptionist, Marion Kesker, was impressed enough by the young man with the deep-set eyes and shy demeanor that she made a note to herself to mention the boy to her boss, Sam Phillips.
My happiness.
Elvis next went to work for Precision Tool, making artillery shells for the government. But after only a few months, fate intervened, answering one of his dreams. Elvis Presley was going to be a truck driver.
That truck kept going by there, I noticed, quite frequently, and I thought, well, hell, these people got a lot of business in this area, you know. But anyway, he finally got up the courage to come in and tell Marion that he wanted to make a record for his mother, a birthday record. Elvis came back, and I just saw the guy, and I couldn't refuse him. And I thought, hey, yeah, I'll make you a record, Elvis. You got $4? Some jazz like that, you know. Thing was, I listened to him, and he sang My Happiness. And this damn guy was just unusually distinct. And I just simply knew that this guy was as potentially good as any person I had auditioned.
He just went down to make a record to see, you know, to see how he would sound. So Mr. Sam Phillips was owner of the recording studio at the time. So he told him, he said, I want to get your name and address before you leave because I might use you, you know, something might come up. So about 8 months later, they called him one night to come down. I think we got something you can use.
When Elvis and I first met Sam, we were both a little intimidated, and I was almost frightful of him because we would go to recording sessions with him and that kind of thing, and he was very aggressive. And I see now that I'm older, it was the professionalism in him that he knew exactly what he wanted and he was going to get it. But I think he knew from the beginning that he had Elvis's best interest at heart.
Elvis had met Sam Phillips, and he said, well, let's see if we can work with you, and I'll put you together with two great musicians here, Scotty Moore and Bill Black. Bill Black was working over at Firestone at the time. Scotty was an accomplished guitar player right there in Memphis. And so Elvis came over there, and he was in his Lincoln, and he was wearing a pink shirt and black pants with a pink stripe down the side, I think. And he came in with that Lincoln smoking, and that's when I met him. I don't think they knew what to think of Elvis. I don't believe they ever saw anyone like Elvis before, and Scotty made a remark, I believe, to Bill, and said, well, what do you think of that? And he said, well, I just don't know, but Sam wants us to work with him, so we'll give it a go.
I knew Scotty Moore had a lot of patience, and Bill Black was the best upright slap bass player. And so Scotty and Bill, they worked back and forth, and they wouldn't have it. And so, I don't know, after the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th time, we were about ready to sack everything up that night and come back again later on.
Elvis wanted to do all these Dean Martin songs, and it just wasn't cutting it. And then I can just see Sam in the studio, you know, just getting ready to say, oh, that's it, that's it. And then Elvis just starts strumming on this Arthur Big Boy Crudup tune, That's All Right Mama. And then Scotty and Bill just come on into it. And then Sam comes out and says, hey guys, what are you doing? And Elvis says, you like that? And he said, hell yeah, I like that. Let's do it again.
It's all right.
When I heard it, it just broke me up. I mean, I said, oh, a version of a rhythm and blues thing. Almost a gut bucket thing, but with the tempo up, it became a quote-unquote a rhythm and blues thing. And so that's how really we got started, and when I heard that, I knew that was what I was looking for, and I hope and prayed that it was the thing that would help us to get Elvis started.
So first or second take, they had it.
Right now, it's old Phillips playing Red Hot and Blue coming through WHBQ and Hotel Tisca on the Maybelline floor right in good old Memphis, Tennessee.
Daddy-O Dewey, what do you want to know? Oh, yes, good people, so Daddy-O Dewey on WHBQ. Come at you Red Hot and Blue, 9 to midnight. We're going to rock, we're going to roll. I'm going to take all this payola and have a whole lot of fun. Dewey Phillips was a very unorthodox disc jockey, had his own style, not sounding like anybody else. His main popularity was from 9 to midnight at night on WHBQ, playing black music, rhythm and blues songs. We called it race music at that time. So the black audience was zeroing in on Dewey at night, and then the white kids were starting to pick up on that music at that time. It was a thing to listen to Dewey Phillips at night. Everybody wanted to listen to Dewey Phillips. Dewey Phillips thought the moon rose and set in Sam Phillips. So Sam would bring up new artist records to Dewey and let Dewey be the first disc jockey in Memphis to play them. Well, Sam brought Elvis up. That's All Right Mama. And he said, Dewey, he said, I got an act here that is very unique and very unusual. You got to listen to this guy. It's a white guy sounding black. And so Dewey put it on and listened to it, and he had a phrase, hey, mother, that's a hit, that's a smash, you know.
What happened was Dewey Phillips started playing Elvis's That's All Right Mama on his radio show at WHBQ. That was coming from the Hotel Tisca. That's where the studio was. Sam Phillips had brought it down to him, no relation. And so he kept playing it over and over, and it was a big hit. And he said, well, I'm going to have Elvis come on down here and give us some words on the mic. Nobody could find him. Elvis, finding out that he was going to be on the radio, was very, very nervous. And he just couldn't be around any radios. And I can just imagine him saying, well, I'll see you guys later. So I think it was his mother that actually said, well, if Elvis is anywhere, it's probably down at the theater.
Yeah, disc jockey by the name of Dewey Phillips. Well, he called the house and wondered where Elvis was. I said, well, he's gone to the show. He said, well, see if you can get him down here. I said, the phone's ringing off the wall and the telegram's coming in, and I can't answer the phone. I got to do my job, you know. So we walked up to the theater and got him, and he went down to the station.
They coaxed him into coming on down to WHBQ studios, and Elvis was very, very nervous. And Dewey just started talking to him and interviewing him, and Elvis had no idea that the microphone was on. He thought they were just talking. And so Elvis said, okay, well, when are we going to do the interview? He says, son, it's already been done.
Dewey Phillips was a character. I went with Elvis a few times to the studio when he was broadcasting, and, you know, he was fascinating to watch, but he would put on a record, and then while that's playing, he would turn around and say things to Elvis, you know, talking to him and trying to get interviews going, and he was a crazy man.
An advertising agency had hired me to play records like a mobile DJ thing, And they had a flatbed truck, and it was just Elvis, Scotty, and Bill. And I introduced Elvis on stage. That was the first time I'd seen him in person when having turned professional and had a record out. Of course, I'd seen him a lot in high school and around the neighborhood and all. But I think that really was his very first official public appearance in Memphis.
With the success of That's All Right, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill began playing local shows as the Blue Moon Boys, a name that capitalized on the song Blue Moon of Kentucky, which was the B-side of their hit single and one that helped maintain a sense of fairness in the billing. That would change as it became increasingly evident that even though Elvis couldn't have done the record without them, no one was coming to see Scotty Moore and Bill Black. Their first performance was at the Overton Park Band Shell in Memphis.
That little show at Overton Park Shell right here in Midtown Memphis, Tennessee, was a turning point in that man's career so far as his innate feeling toward whether or not people were going to love him, like him, and appreciate what he was giving them and doing his best to do it. By God, when he got on that stage, unless you were there, you're not going to believe the response.
But playing small gigs in their hometown, however thrilling local celebrity status might be, was never going to further their careers. The trio decided to expand their horizons. Sam Phillips and Bob Neal, who functioned as Elvis's manager, arranged to get the Blue Moon Boys booked on a couple of country music radio programs, the Louisiana Hayride and the legendary Grand Ole Opry. The Opry was the peak of success for a country music star, and it was rare that an unknown like Elvis Presley would be afforded the opportunity of playing on its valuable airwaves.
I was working for about a year and a half in nightclubs and football fields, barns, Louisiana Hayride, yes sir. They threw me off the Grand Ole Opry. I went to the Grand Ole Opry, man, they gave me $6 and said, look, go home, man.
I knew Jim Denny very well, who was program director for the Grand Ole Opry, but they weren't interested in what we were doing on Elvis. And after the fourth or fifth time we had cussed and discussed this, he said, if the boys in the neighborhood sometime wants to drop by, we'll see if we can maybe get him on there. Finally got him to commit to put him on the old Hank Snow's portion at 10:15 at night. When we finally got him on, Elvis went on stage, and he didn't get the greatest introduction.
Some of them thought he was a little wild, you know. He'd just wiggle his knees. I thought he was pretty good.
I met Elvis the first time when I was working on the Grand Ole Opry as a bass player. And I was walking across the stage, and I see this guy standing over in a corner. He's got a guitar strapped over his back. And he's standing there all alone, he's pacing around. And I walked over to him and I said, my name is Buddy Kill and I work on the Opry. What's the matter with you? He said, I'm Elvis Presley and I'm scared to death. And I said, of what? He said, these people are gonna hate me. I said, no, they're not gonna hate you. He said, yes, they are. They're gonna hate me. But he went on stage and he did Blue Moon of Kentucky. You wouldn't know he was nervous once he got on the stage.
He went to audition for them, and somehow they didn't really care for him. I mean, the management. They said, oh, you better keep your job, you know, and go back to driving a truck or something. So that kind of hurt his feelings, and I don't think he ever got over that one.
Jim Denny is quoted as saying, don't give up your day job. I have trouble believing that he said that, but Scotty Moore says he heard him say it. So if Scotty heard him say it.
That was kind of a shock for him, I think, because he was excited to do it and, you know, ready to perform on stage, but it was, he wasn't received well. He was hurt over that, I think, and not so much hurt that they didn't like his music but hurt that another person would be so blunt and so hurtful to say something to him like, don't give up your day job.
Scotty Moore told me that Elvis cried all the way back from Nashville to Memphis. And the truth be known, that Elvis was not a fan of Nashville, Tennessee. And it was mainly because of that. He liked the fact that the musicians were great in Nashville, liked the fact the studio was great. By the same token, mister, he never bought a house there, never partied there, never hung out in Nashville. What does that tell you?
The Blue Moon Boys were crushed by the response to their performance. That failure on the Grand Ole Opry would leave a bad taste in Elvis's mouth for years to come. The Louisiana Hayride, on the other hand, was almost a stepchild to the Opry. It was a nice show, but nothing that could ever be too important to a performer's career.
When he went on and he started out on That's All Right, Mama, this guy was still in his little cocoon, you know, before that butterfly comes on out. And Elvis Presley tore him up alive.
It seems to me that the whole attitude was different at the Louisiana Hayride, and I don't know if it was, maybe they were a little more forgiving or accepting than the Opry was at that time. But no, I think he enjoyed the trips to the Louisiana Hayride. But people in Memphis instinctively knew, you know, that he was destined for greatness. And I don't think anybody in Memphis, I never heard an unkind word or anybody that wasn't excited about him.
The first time I heard Elvis Presley was on Al Benson's show in Chicago, a rhythm and blues station. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. It was an all-black station, of course. It just gave me life and hope and the desire to make music. Then one day, Al Benson said, we've got this new guy, Eldon Priestley, called Mystery Train. Train, train, coming down the line. And it was different from any of the Chicago blues. I didn't know he was a white guy. It's just that people were talking about it and it had that beat. And only later, when I saw him on TV, did I realize Elvis Presley was in fact Eldon Priestley of Mystery Train.
Elvis's success on the Hayride led to a one-year contract to appear on the show every Saturday. Now a full-time musician, Elvis returned home and quit his job as a truck driver, spurning the advice he had received at the Opry. The Hayride also introduced Elvis to a new friend who would have a profound effect on the life of the king of rock and roll. He was a Dutch immigrant and former carnival barker named Andreas van Kuijek, but his friends just called him Colonel.
Tom was different from most. See, he wasn't a colonel when I first met him. You people call him Colonel, but when I met him, he was just Tom. And that's the reason I refer to him as Tom. And we got along fine. But, oh yeah, very good promoter.
Colonel Parker at that time managed an act named Hank Snow. And Elvis was an extra added attraction. That's what it said on the poster cards. And Elvis was getting pretty popular in Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, and Oklahoma. So Colonel Parker picked up Elvis to open up the show or maybe be second on the bill or third on the bill. Well, Colonel Parker saw what was happening. He knew something was happening, but he couldn't place his finger on it because every show that Elvis went on those shows, he stole the show. The other acts, they could have given up and gone home because after Elvis had left, they kept hollering, we want Elvis, we want Elvis. And so Colonel Parker told Hank Snow, they had an agency together over in Nashville. He said, Hank, why don't you go down to Memphis and talk to Elvis's parents, Gladys and Burnham, and give them a sell job and tell them what I've done for you. They'll be impressed by you because you're a big country star, and it'll help us get Elvis in this agency. And Hank Snow gave Colonel Parker a great recommendation and told him how much Colonel had helped his career along. And while he was out on the road, he read in the trade magazines in Billboard and Variety that Elvis had signed with Colonel Tom Parker. So as soon as Hank Snow got off the road, he said he went into Colonel Parker's office and he said, hey, Colonel, I see where we got that Elvis Presley kid. And Colonel Parker said, what do you mean we, Hank?
Colonel's all right, I guess. Yeah, I mean, he's not my favorite person, but we didn't get along, but I didn't have to get along with the Colonel. Anything I needed something, I'd go see Elvis. But, you know, he worked 150% for Elvis, period. That's all he knew about. He didn't care what anybody's concerned about anything. He could care less. As long as he was working for Elvis, he was happy.
Let's face it, he was an old carny huckster. He wasn't interested in art. He was interested in showy glitter and colors and things that happened quickly and things that made money. I mean, this is a guy that used to stand outside of Elvis's early concerts selling 8x10 glossies of Elvis for 10 cents. And he stood there himself hawking them.
Colonel Parker once told him that you have $1 million worth of talent. And he said, by the end of the year, you'll have $1 million. And I believe he would say that. I mean, that's the way the Colonel was, and he always thought ahead. And when he said something, he really came through with it, and he did.
By the time of my junior prom in '55, he was, of course, on the road a lot. But I'll always remember that because he was in Texas, and I was so afraid that he wasn't going to get back in town for my prom, and his mom and I had actually been shopping, and she had bought my dress. And Bob Neal's wife had ordered my flowers, which Elvis got kind of upset about that because he ordered flowers himself, and he was kind of bothered that they thought that he wouldn't remember to order my corsage. So I left the one that Miss Neal ordered in the refrigerator, of course, but he came in just in time. And in fact, I just a couple of months ago went to my 45th class reunion, and it was funny. So many of the people that were in school said, you know, boy, I remember when Elvis came over and picked you up, and I remember y'all doing this, and I remember when y'all walked in at the prom. You know, it's a lot of fun memories.
With Colonel Parker's promise fresh in his mind, Elvis's career began a rapid acceleration unmatched in the history of entertainment. He began to get bookings all over the country, still knocking him dead with that Presley performance style, but this time he had the promotional powers of Colonel Tom behind him, as well as a new sound courtesy of the latest addition to the band, drummer D.J. Fontana. Although the Colonel appreciated all that Sam Phillips had done to get Elvis started, he felt that Sun, with its limited influence, could only take Presley so far, and Parker had bigger plans for the performer he now called his boy. He also didn't want anyone else around to influence Elvis's thinking when it came to business decisions. On November 20th, 1955, Elvis signed with recording giant RCA in a deal that was reportedly the biggest in the history of the music industry to date. Presley also began appearing on television, a blossoming medium with growing power and influence over the American way of life. Arthur Godfrey's talent show had auditioned Elvis in New York for a spot on the program, but decided he just wasn't good enough for their quality show. Thanks to his appearances on the Dorsey Brothers stage show, Presley was rapidly becoming something of a curiosity to the teenagers who had been raised on Frank Sinatra and Perry Como.
And you know the way she touches your cheek. Well, I taught her how.
Everything he did from then on was just like, you know, wow, look where he's at now. It was just a steady progression of popularity, and his visibility on television was exciting, of course.
The sight of the tears drives you out of your mind.
Elvis and I talked about getting married almost from the time we started dating, probably until early '56. We remained friends forever and ever. In fact, we were still friends even when we knew that we did not have a future together, because his career was going a totally different way. We knew that he would never have a 9-to-5 job, and we both had a good cry about it. And then he went his way and I went mine.
I was the one.
But it was his appearance on the Milton Berle Show that changed the way people looked at Elvis Presley and rock and roll.
I want to tell you something. Incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that I'm revealing any secrets when I say that that Elvis Presley is the fastest rising young singer in the entertainment industry today.
Some were outraged by what they saw as the blatant sexual content of Elvis's gyrating hips. Others were paranoid about Presley's voice.
We've set up a 20-man committee to do away with this vulgar, animalistic, nigger rock and roll bob. Our committee will check with the restaurant owners and the cafes to see what Presley records is on their machines, and then ask them to do away with them.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, you're crying all the time.
Rock and roll has got to go.
No, it just all depends, I mean, on how you look at it. I guess if you want to think it's nasty or sexy, you could, but to me it's just,
Well, the two things are not necessarily the same.
Yeah, well, you know, it's just so limber and loose. I mean, it's really marvelous.
Well, he just feels the rhythm, digs it the most. You don't see anything wrong with it? No.
The obscenity and vulgarity of the rock and roll music is obviously a means by which the white man and his children can be driven to the level with a nigger. It is obviously nigger music.
In an attempt to head off criticism, Elvis agreed to perform his hit Hound Dog to an actual basset hound while wearing a tuxedo on the Steve Allen Show. He hated every minute of it.
I did the Steve Allen Show, and they had me dressed in a tuxedo on the Steve Allen Show and stand perfectly still. I couldn't move. I was standing like this. And had me singing to a dog, man. There was a dog here, you know. And I'm saying, you ain't nothing but a hound dog. And the dog's looking at me like, what are you doing, calling me names?
On CBS, The Ed Sullivan Show was ordered to film Elvis only from the waist up to avoid touching off the same firestorm that the Burl Show had caused.
To ourselves, we thought it was funny because those of us that had known him forever knew that that's what he did all the time. When he sat down, one of the first comments my mother made was, well, can he not be still? Yeah. You know, because he was always just moving. So when people started to make a big deal out of it, we really thought it was funny because it was like, hey, that's just him. He is not putting that on. So it was kind of then a shock for people to make references to Elvis the pelvis and that kind of thing, and try to make something off color about it, because he would have never in his wildest imagination done anything that would have been offensive to anybody.
What about the name Elvis the Pelvis? I mean, it's one of the most childish expressions I've ever heard. I don't like to be called Elvis the Pelvis, but if they want to call me that, I mean, there's nothing I can do about it.
Soon after, Elvis became the nation's foremost celebrity and the unwitting recipient of an enormous outpouring of emotion from the youth of America. Though Elvis would remain unaware of his overall impact on the music business and popular culture, his newfound success gave him a chance to change his life in ways he had never imagined. Presley's escalating income allowed him to fully develop the role of caretaker to his family, something he had already begun in a switch on the traditional roles of parent and child.
Elvis and his mother had a very special relationship. There's something special about his son and his mom, and Elvis and his mother had that. He totally adored her, and she did him. But Elvis and Vernon, this is a hard question for me to answer. I guess it's the only way I can say this. Elvis was almost the father figure. I don't know that Vernon ever assumed his role as the father figure. Not to say that Elvis didn't love him, he loved his father, but most of the decision-making and things of importance were mostly discussed between Elvis and Gladys. And I think a lot of that had to do from the time that Elvis got out of school. He contributed financially a lot of times more than Vernon did.
Elvis's dreams were coming true at an alarming rate, and, like any young man flush with fame and fortune, he indulged his love affair with that all-American institution, the automobile. Elvis bought a used car from a maker that would become almost synonymous with his own name, Cadillac.
'Cause 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 '
Elvis buys his first Cadillac, and anyone that knows Elvis knows how much he loved cars, and this was his baby, his very first one. And he's just driving along with Scotty and Bill, and everything is cool. And then Elvis starts to see all these people around him, and he's thinking, oh, great, you know, they recognize me, and he starts waving and so forth, and they're trying to get his attention for another reason. And then all of a sudden, Elvis starts smelling these fumes, and he realizes, hey, man, my car's on fire. And so it's either try to do something about saving the car or save the instruments. And so Elvis, Scotty, and Bill opted for saving the instruments. And of course, the car burned up on the side of the road. And then Elvis, for about a month, he would walk around and just say, man, I love that car.
Even though Elvis's first experience with a dream car had ended in a less than storybook fashion, he purchased 2 more Cadillacs that same year. The first was a 1956 Eldorado that he had painted purple and drove as a symbol of his new title of the King of Rock and Roll. The second was a 1955 Fleetwood that he had painted pink and gave to his mother, even though she had never learned to drive. The 55 Fleetwood would become the most famous Cadillac in the world, a dual symbol of rock and roll and a boy's devotion to his mother. It was the only car in his vast collection that Elvis never sold. He also bought a Lincoln Continental Mark II, a car that was so scarce the dealer ran ads stating that if you saw one on the highway, there was a 1 in 2,000 chance it would be Elvis Presley at the wheel. This was the car he was driving when he pulled into a gas station in late 1956. A group of girls gathered around the Lincoln, clamoring for autographs. As usual, Elvis was happy to oblige, but the gas station attendant was impatient and told Presley to leave. The young singer explained he'd only be a moment, but the angry attendant struck Elvis in the head, so Presley got out of the car and decked him. This landed Elvis in court, where the charges were eventually dropped.
The court finds insufficient evidence to support the charge.
Elvis also purchased his family's very first modern home on Audubon Drive in Memphis. It featured a pool and a carport where Elvis could park his ever-expanding collection of vehicles. There was also a small fence where he met freely with his fans once word got out that Elvis Presley had moved into the neighborhood. Gladys and Vernon Presley watched their son's meteoric rise to superstardom on a brand new television set in the living room of that very house.
Rock and roll stars today, you know, one of the first things you have to do when you become really successful, you got to buy your mom a house. It's just an unwritten rule in the rock and roll world. Elvis started that unwritten rule.
Elvis also indulged his other passion, clothing. But he continued to shop at the store that had provided him with his unique wardrobe from his high school days, Lansky Brothers on Beale Street.
We had a big tailor shop in the city of Memphis. I mean, one of the biggest. All you big guys started coming in right behind Elvis. They knew where Elvis bought his clothes. Elvis was our PR man. Anybody that saw him, they knew what he was wearing. They wanted the same thing. A lot of silk shirts, a lot of velour shirts that he was wearing, little old jackets with the lace on the pockets. Dynamite, man, really sharp. And everybody took one of them. Man, they liked it. Elvis was sharp.
As far as his clothing, you know, he continued to dress flashy, but more classy looking flashy, I guess you could say, 57. You know, we'd go to Lansky Brothers on Beale Street, he would buy nice, flashy, different looking stuff, and he was dynamite on stage, very hypnotic. You couldn't take your eyes off of it.
But Elvis's popularity was growing too large to be contained by this small suburban neighborhood. It was time to find a new house suited to his new station in life. He would find that house in early 1957 and would keep the name given to it by its former owners. They called it Graceland. By this time, he had also found himself a new steady girlfriend, one who would not feel out of place in the circles he now traveled. Local celebrity Anita Wood now became Elvis's main female companion.
I met Elvis in 1957. I was on Top 10 Dance Party on WHBQ radio television. And it was a popular dance show that they had every Saturday afternoon. The teenagers would come and dance, and he watched that show a lot.
Okay, thanks a lot.
And one Saturday after the show, he wanted a date to see me that night. And to be honest with you, I really wasn't an Elvis fan at that time. And so this night, I got dressed and ready, and when they drove up in the Cadillac, they had a big, long, black Cadillac, and then Elvis started driving around like we did many, many dates that we had, just drive around Memphis. And then Elvis said, would you like to come out and see Graceland? He just purchased Graceland at the time. And he proceeded to show me around, and he showed me all the rooms and took me and introduced me to his mother and dad. Then he began to try to get a little fresh with me. And I said, oh, no, that won't work. You know, you're going to have to take me home. So he said, okay. And he took me downstairs and took me home. He was a gentleman about it. He was very nice. But he did try to get fresh the first date, but he didn't get to first base.
Though Elvis demanded that she remain 100% faithful to him during their relationship, he himself indulged in yet another perk of his growing celebrity: feminine attention.
Miss Presley, she wanted us to get married, and she wanted us to have a little boy and to name him Elvis Jr. And she said, I can just see him running up and down the driveway in his little bare feet, the little blonde-headed boy, you know. We talked about things like that a lot. I remember she telling me about Natalie Wood coming to visit there, and she didn't much like that. She would talk to me about how she hoped that, you know, we would end up together, that you're just the girl for him and you'll take care of him.
His career was now taking him away more than ever before, but now he was not simply touring. Elvis had become a movie star. During the next 2 years, Elvis would make 4 movies that would be considered some of his finest acting work. He would also further cement his life in Memphis, making himself more than just a celebrity who happened to call the city home. Every year at Christmas, in a ceremony that would become familiar to the denizens of the city, Elvis would hand out envelopes containing $1,000 apiece to various charities at the courthouse downtown. At the same time, he would spare no expense to decorate Graceland like a winter wonderland as his visual gift to his neighbors and fans.
Memphis was it for him. It was the real deal. I could just see him. I could just see that relaxed atmosphere in him. And he would whispering under his breath to me, yeah, GK, Graceland will rock. Get some chicks out to the house tonight, you know, and stuff like that.
Whenever he wasn't in Hollywood, Elvis would come home to relax by taking friends and family to familiar places around his home. Though even at this early stage in his career, it was becoming more and more difficult for Elvis to enjoy his hometown like a normal person. Now, special arrangements would have to be made to accommodate Memphis's favorite son. If Elvis wanted to go to the fair or local amusement park, the entire park would be rented out.
He always invited his fans to go with. Sometimes we would go to the fairgrounds and he would rent it after hours, and we would stay all night long and ride everything as many times as we wanted to. Just have a wonderful time. That was a lot of all night long. Here I am getting so tired and sleeping. Elvis would all be ready to go.
For movies, the theater would be closed to all but Elvis and his invited guests. And if the newly crowned king of rock and roll wanted to shop, it would have to be done after hours when his hordes of fans had gone home. And it was in Memphis at Graceland during the holiday season that Presley would receive the letter that would change his life in ways no one, not even the Colonel, could foresee. Elvis Presley was ordered by the United States government to report for induction into the armed forces.
When he did get his notice, I'm sure he was not too happy. I mean, when you think you're the biggest star in the world at the time, and all of a sudden the Army says, hey, we want you. I mean, you can't feel too good, no matter what it is. I didn't feel good, and I was a nobody when I got drafted. I wasn't too happy about it at all.
I can remember the day that Elvis received the draft notice, and he brought it into us, and Miss Presley and Mr. Presley and myself. And They just could not believe that he was going to have to leave them and go in the service. He really didn't want to leave his family. I mean, and nobody would want to. Elvis and Mrs. Presley were very close. She was devastated, scared, sad.
Congratulations, you are now in the Army. You're all privates. That's the way you will be addressed from now on. Private Presley, you'll be in charge of the group.
Though it would have been easy for Elvis to get a special assignment in the Army to one of the military's entertainment units, making his stay in the Army one of performing and special privilege, he felt it was important that he be treated like any other soldier. The only special treatment he requested was that he be allowed to complete his latest picture before entering the service, so that, in his words, these folks will not lose so much money with all they have done so far. The government allowed the deferment, and King Creole was finished. On March 24, 1958, Elvis left Graceland, kissed his mother and girlfriend goodbye, and reported to the induction center to be sworn in as a soldier in the United States Army.
He hugged me last, and the last thing he said to me was, "Little, I love you, and I will return, and don't forget me." It was hard, it was difficult. I could not, my heart was being just torn away, and it was very hard to see him leave.
From here on out, the king of rock and roll would be known as Private Elvis Aaron Presley, serial number 533-10761.